introduce to you tonight Cathy Smith Bowers. A native of South Carolina, Ms. Bowers was the winner of the 1990 General Electric Award for Younger Writers. She is currently a poet in residence at Queens College in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she has also taught in the International Study Program, traveling to England, France, Italy, Hungary, Greece, Czechoslovakia, Austria, Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Switzerland, Germany, and elsewhere. Her first book, The Love That Ended Yesterday in Texas, was the winner of the inaugural Texas Tech University Press First Book Award, later renamed for Walt McDonald, and was republished by Iris Press. Her latest book, Traveling in Time of Danger, was published in 1999. Her poems have appeared in many prestigious magazines and journals, including the Atlantic Monthly, the Georgia Review, Poetry, Shenandoah, the Southern Poetry Review, the Southern Review, the Kenyon Review, and others. Despite the title of her most recent book, and the fact that the settings of the poems range from a railroad car in a southern town to the salt mines beneath Salzburg, these poems are grounded in place and in a humane connection that includes an elderly stranger observed tying his wife's shoes, as much as the speaker's brother, his tragically reduced life, a subject of several meditations, including perhaps the book's most moving poem, Learning How to Pray. Despite the scars, the breakage that this close observer witnesses in the human experience, despite the anger and doubt lost triggers, Bowers never loses her sense of wonder and empathy. With deep compassion, she holds up to the light individual dreams, and especially individual loss, as the poems make their journey through the sorrows of the flesh. As the speaker, describing the market woman in the poem Sponges, saw with what love she held them for our inspection, turning each toward the light, those many vacant chambers. Bowers holds up for our inspection the most human gestures and failings, with reverence for both subject and reader. With clarity and honesty, her language seems to speak directly into the reader's heart, mind, and soul. In doing so, these poems become more than story, more than prayer. Please welcome Cathy Smith Bowers.
Wow, that was great, Sandy. I'm impressed. Will you travel around with me and say that?
Sure.
Okay, let's see, this is good. You hear? Everybody hearing okay? Okay. Well, I'm just totally honored to be here tonight, and am grateful to Barry and to all of you guys, and Michael and Sandy and everybody, and Michael's class that I had such a lovely time with today. And I'm grateful for the Georgia Poetry Circuit, and would like to dedicate this reading tonight to a person, Stan Lindbergh, who was the editor of the Georgia Review for many, many, many years, and really made the Georgia Review the fine journal that it is. And Stan died last week, and his funeral was on Saturday, and it wasn't really a funeral, it was a true celebration of his life. So I just want to dedicate this reading to Stan Lindbergh. Okay, okay. Well, if you, anyone who has any questions about any poems, you know, they usually ask them at the end of the reading. If you want to ask any questions during the reading, you can raise your hand. You don't have to wait until the end. Don't interrupt me in the middle of the poem that I might be reading, but, you know, you can do that too if you want to. But I'll be delighted to to answer any questions at the end or during the reading. I'm going to start with a poem that I think is probably very appropriate for tonight. Everybody's been talking about snow. And I don't know about you guys, I don't know how much snow you usually get, but in where I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, we hardly get any snow, but we pray for it a lot. And this poem is from a memory of one of those days when I was a little girl when they were calling for snow. And I've already decided, by the way, that I want to get snowed in here. So if anybody sees, whoever sees the first flake, just raise your hand, interrupt me. I want to get snowed in here. This is one of those images that I really cherished, and those are a lot of times the images that I will sit down with and just start working with and see what happens. And as I said, it was one of those days when I was in grammar school that they were calling for snow. And that evening, my father, who worked in the cotton mill, came in and he started telling this joke. And he told the first part of it, and when he got to the punchline, he whispered it into my mother's ear. And so it ends, I just was trying to describe that moment and that memory, and so it ended up that this poem is a lot more than just about snow. My parents were, my childhood home was basically a battleground, and my parents basically hated each other. But this is one of the tender moments that I remember witnessing between those two, and that's what I wanted to capture in this poem. It's called Snow. It was the only act of intimacy I ever witnessed between them. That joke my father told her, his opening line, "I hope it snows so deep," and then how for the punch he reached out and pulled her to him to whisper words that sent her red and slapping at his khaki shirt, and then her hand lifting to his chin to remove the little ghosts of cotton that fluttered there. Our teachers had sent us home from school calling, "See you Monday," that Thursday in December, as we ran crazed into the schoolyard and to our separate houses to hold vigil for that white coming, that promise we wanted so badly to believe. We could feel already in the graying sky its soft descent. All evening, the heater roared its warmth into the room as we talked of snow cream so cold it hurt your head, the fine spin a hubcap gives down a hill of white. But by the close of second shift, all that had shone was a stray barking beneath the streetlight, our father in from the mill, blowing the night from his hands and telling that joke, his mouth burrowing into the smell of our mother's hair, and somewhere, breaking dim above the smokestacks, a few odd stars no one would admit to seeing. But that's not how it's going to happen tonight, guys. It's going to snow. It's coming tonight. It didn't come that night, but it's coming tonight. Have faith. Okay. I'm going to move over to my first book, The Love That Ended Yesterday in Texas, which has nothing to do about Texas, by the way. Probably my favorite subject to write about is family, so you're going to hear a lot of these family poems tonight. This poem is another memory that's very, very important to me. It's a poem about the little girl that my mother named me for. And back in 1949, when my mother was pregnant with me, a little girl out in California fell into an abandoned well. And she was in there for over 2 days. She was about 3 years old. And unfortunately, by the time they finally got her out, she was dead. And her name was Cathy. And my mother, along with everybody else in the nation, was so taken with the story. she just became obsessed with it and was devastated with the outcome of that story. So she did really the only thing that she could do. When I was born, shortly thereafter, she named me after this little girl to memorialize her. I was obsessed with this story, and used to harass my mother about the details. Did she have any other brothers and sisters? Are her parents, do they still live in California? Just anything I could think of. I hungered for the details of the story. And of course, my mother didn't remember anything. She just was like, I don't know, leave me alone. I was so obsessed with the story that long after I was into adulthood, I went to the Charlotte Observer and looked at their old papers all the way back to 1949 to find the stories. Had no luck. Do you remember, however, when the same thing happened to another little girl? Does anybody remember her name? Yeah, little Jessica McClure. And it was the same story. It was unbelievable. The same age. She stayed there down in the well the same number of days. They had the same kind of difficulty getting her out. And of course, the thing that was different was that when they did get her out, she was still alive with just a few little scratches and cuts. But when that story was taking place, when that story broke and after they got her out, the Charlotte Observer came. There was the huge headline, little Jessie is safe. And I was just reading randomly through the rest of the paper, and inside, in an obscure little spot, was another story. And the headline read, "Drama Stirs Memory of Tragedy." And there was the story of the little girl, Cathy Fiscus, that my mother had named me for all those years before. And this poem, the first draft at least, just flooded out. It was as if I'd been trying to write this all of my life and I could finally do it. One of the things I learned in that article was that 1949 was the first year that people started getting televisions in their homes. And as you know, the first televisions were black and white. That was the first event people watched together as a nation. The first event that people watched together as a nation. So this poem is called Namesake, and it has a dedication for Cathy Fiscus III, who died in an abandoned well the summer of 1949. From the face of the earth is how they put it when someone disappears. So all day your father paces among bulldozers and cranes as your mother sits in the car muttering to the visor. I hang in my own mother's womb, little turtle, zeppelin of skin and marrow. The chipped ice she craves grinds in her teeth like pneumatic saws. And because television that summer will be the closest thing to miracle, she gives in to the sloppy recliner, to the window fans rattle and clack, to watch as hour by hour hope fails in black and white. Down there, you must have heard something queer, a scraping at earth, some ancient burrowing, and what word can name the descent of midgets armed with buckets and spades? You lived 2 days, your voice tamping at the surface, that one song rising now and then into the suspended mic. Then air, light, the blood hammering at the soft closure of my skull. They lifted me out, all slag and sediment, sludge of another life, and gave me your name. Okay, let's see. Go back to traveling in time of danger. This, the first section of this poem that I'm going to read now is the title poem for the first section of the book. The first section of the book is called Motherland. And this poem is a poem to my mother, for my mother. One of my earliest memories concerning my mother was her obsession with her weight. If you saw the two of us together, you would never know that we were mother and daughter. She's about 5'1" and very, very large, and has, as I said, always been obsessed with her weight. And, you know, from as far back as I can remember, it was always like, does this dress make me look too big? What about this color? She was always on a diet, always worried about her weight. And I just loved her body. I loved it. As a matter of fact, I would sit in church. There was a little girl who lived about 2 streets down from me who would sit around 2 pews up with her mother, her little teeny skinny mother. And I'd glare at her in church. And I'd be thinking, you think that's a mama. That ain't no mama. This is a mama. So I wanted to write this poem in honor of my mother's body. I was also doing an independent study with 2 students. At the time I was working on this poem, and we made a challenge to each other. We said, okay, for next week we all have to write poems that have geography in them. So here's my geography poem. Motherland. I pitied the other children, their skinny mothers. Nothing to burrow when the church pew began to harden like sugar brittle or God. Their elbows sharp as crags, we climbed to the bluff where Jimmy Adams took our dare and jumped and never came up again. I pitied them, their mothers, all point and longitude, tentative as sandbars the chain gang dozed to stay the riverbanks. My mama was a continent, terra softa where she sprawled in her big chair, or across the bed when thunder ripped the shingles and rain swelled the sills like ripe earth. And there in the valleys of blankets and pillows, each of us staked claim to whatever fleshy region we had chosen to settle while the storm spent itself. My sisters nestling the soft slopes of her breasts, me floating meridians of hip and thigh. My mama was promised land, and we, small redoubts not even our father could penetrate. Odd denizen from that country of men we could see mounting the horizon, their bright flags flying, their cannons aimed. I really didn't expect those men to come into the end of this poem. As a matter of fact, I found myself saying, "Get out! What are you doing in here? This is a poem about my mama." But they were there and they wanted to stay. So there they are. I was reading this. If my mother is at the reading, I'm really careful about, what to read. And we were at sort of an informal reading. It was in like a living room setting. And my mother did this really interesting thing. She watched to see where I was going to sit to give my reading, and then she got behind me on a higher chair. It was like she was putting herself in a superior position. And so I wanted to read this poem, and I thought I needed to ask her, and I said, "Mom, do you mind if I read Motherland?" And she said, "No, go ahead and read it." And so I was giving a little bit of context, and I said, "Well, when I was a little girl, my mother was always really conscious about her weight." And I said, "When I was a little girl, my mother was," and she interrupted and said, "a little bit chubby." She's a pretty good sport. Okay. Well, as I said before I read that first poem, Snow, my childhood life was not the most peaceful existence. And as a matter of fact, my father, who became more and more of a hopeless alcoholic, by the time I was about 17, my mother got a job. She had never worked before, had no experience, but she found a job, and we found a little house across town, and we snuck things out for about 2 weeks, and we'd rearrange the furniture so my father, when he came home from work that night, wouldn't notice anything was gone. And then one night he came home from work, and we were gone. We had disappeared. And I was remembering that time, and that how difficult that time was, and you know, we had gone from poor to poorer. But I had this boyfriend who worked at the Piggly Wiggly, and he sort of saved our lives, at least for those first few months. This poem is called Groceries. I had a boyfriend once, after my mother and brothers and sisters and I fled my father's house, who worked at the Piggly Wiggly, where he stocked shelves on Fridays until midnight, then drove to my house to sneak me out, take me down to the tracks by the cotton mill, where he lifted me and the quilt I brought into an empty boxcar. All night, the wild thunder of looms, the roar of trains passing on adjacent tracks, hauling their difficult cargo, cotton bales or rolls of muslin on their way to the bleachery to be whitened, patterned into stripes and checks, into still life gardens of wisteria and rose. And when the whistle signaled third shift free, he would lift me down again onto the gravel and take me home. If my mother ever knew, she didn't say, so glad in her new freedom, so grateful for the bags of damaged goods stolen from the stockroom and left on our kitchen table, slashed bags of rice and beans he had bandaged with masking tape, the labelless cans, the cereals and detergents in varying stages of destruction, plenty to get us through the week, and even some plums and cherries, tender and delicious, still whole inside the mutilated cans and floating in their own sweet juice. God, my mother was at a reading one night when I read this one, and when she was sitting, I'm just remembering how she positions herself at my readings. She was sitting directly in front of me, about where you're sitting. When I finished reading this poem, I saw her reach over to the woman sitting beside her and tap her, and she said, "She makes a lot of stuff up." And read another one out of the love that ended yesterday in Texas. And I'll move away from my family childhood poems for a while. I try to remember those moments of tenderness, just as I told you about that poem Snow, when my father told that joke. And this is maybe the companion poem. Wasn't meant as a companion poem. And they're probably not companion poems since they're in two different books, but nevertheless, this is, I didn't see my father again for 20 years after we left. And when he finally came back to our hometown, he was very sick, and he was ended up in the Veterans Hospital. And after he died, my mother told me this story, this memory. And it wasn't so much, I was very taken with the story of what my father had done, but not so much that as I was taken and moved by her reaction to it, because first thing I asked her was, "Oh my God, what did you do?" And I didn't expect her to say what she said in response to that. This poem is called Fire. After he died, My mother told how once my father set fire to the closet where my sisters and I kept our clothes. It was a day in September, too early for that odd angle of light that signals fall, too cool for a Carolina summer, as if October had seeped from its proper space in the feed store calendar behind the stove, bleeding through to the page above, to the quiet bowed heads of September's elk and bison. We were thumping doodlebugs across the cool, damp earth beneath the porch, and she was in the kitchen kneading bread when she smelled smoke coming from the room where we slept. She ran with the sticky milk and flour oozing between her fingers. She ran like a woman flaming, mad through the burning doors of an asylum some psycho set fire to. And there he was, my father, in the closet, curled on his hands and knees, like a lone camper, beating out the campfire's rampant blaze. For the insurance money, he told her later, when she asked why he had done it. He wouldn't have let it hurt us, he said, or the rest of the house, just a few old clothes we could no longer wear. We were in bed asleep, and she wanted to kill him, to pummel the mouth and nose the way she had found him hunkered, slapping at his pathetic flame. But all she did was take him to her breast and hold him, shaking her head, saying, "Edward, Edward." Try to be a little bit more uplifting now. This is a poem, I guess this is, I didn't know this was starting out as a love poem, but I realized as I was working on it that it was becoming a love poem. And this is a love poem for my ex-husband. Yes, you can still write love poems to ex-husbands. But this memory is the memory of an old truck that he had. And I didn't even think that it should have been called a truck. It had evolved into a species of its own. And, you know, I thought, gosh, we're not that poor. Why don't you just sell it for junk, for parts, and get a better truck? And we were driving down we were riding down the road one day, going about 55 miles an hour, and he starts to change the gear, and the gear stick pulls off in his hand. And the most euphoric look came over his face. I had never seen him that happy in my life. And it occurred to me, that was it. That's why he loved the truck. So I was writing this poem about, you know, this idea of the truck. And you've had philosophy, intro to philosophy. Does anybody know the name Heraclitus? Anybody know Heraclitus? Okay. Well, you know, Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher who came up with the radical idea that the world was not static, but in a constant state of flux or change. Now, that doesn't sound real radical to us, but then it was. And does anybody know his most famous quote that sort of works as a metaphor for that idea? Anybody?
Everything changes but change?
Well, sort of. You can't step into the same river twice. Remember that one? You can't step into the same river twice. So I decided to call this poem, "You Can't Drive the Same Truck Twice," for my ex-husband. When I heard the sudden thunder of my husband's truck explode into the drive and saw him, after ramming the defective gear stick into neutral, emerge crazy-eyed and fevered, fling up the battered hood, go down and disappear beneath its open wound of primer, I knew how the evening would go. How deep into moonlight he would hang like Jonah, half in, half out, his full weight given to the wrench, grip to the stripped bolts and nuts, capping and uncapping the ancient battery, his body lost to that odd carcass of scavenged parts. I loved him for his love of broken things, the handleless hoes and axes, the sprung rumble seat bought years ago at auction, the legless chairs retrieved from garbage heaps, that truck each day he reinvented, like the rivers of Heraclitus, like Van Gogh's olive trees and irises that quiver still, bristle, as if caught forever in the antique instant of their opening. It's why we love Jesus, some philosopher once said, instead of God. Why lovers love the moon that's always falling. How about another poem with a truck in it? This poem was written about one of those days where from the minute you get up in the morning until the minute you go to bed, everything goes wrong. And I had, said, nothing could happen, to make this day any worse. So about 6 o'clock, it was getting dark. I went out to the mailbox and I opened up the mail, and there was a letter from Jacques Cousteau. Do you know who Jacques Cousteau was? And in this letter, Jacques Cousteau was telling me that I alone could save the dolphin. And I swear, for a few seconds, I really thought I was the only person in the world who had got that letter. And I didn't know how he had found me, My older brother enters this poem toward the middle of it. But one of the wonderful things that I learned in that letter from Jacques Cousteau, the information about the dolphin, is that when a mama dolphin has a little baby dolphin, the first thing that she does is scoots that baby dolphin up to the surface so it can get its first breath. And it's so instinctive for her to do that she does it to everything. Everything that she comes across under the water, she scoops up to the surface. And scientists believe that this is how the legend of the mermaid came into being, because there were all these stories in ancient times of sailors who had fallen overboard and were drowning, and suddenly this unknown presence came along and just scooped them up to the surface and saved their lives. And scientists believe that was the origin of the legend of the mermaids, but it was really dolphins doing that. So this poem is called Peripheral Resurrections. It had been the kind of day they sing about in country westerns, how the drunk, the day his mother got out of prison to attend the funeral of his wife, put a pistol to his head and missed. And I just couldn't muster much enthusiasm when I found that evening in my mailbox a letter from Jacques Cousteau insisting I alone could save the dolphin. But later, when you stopped by in the truck you borrowed from a friend after your wife had wiped you out of everything, I couldn't help but laugh at your perfected misery. and the way your ragged face gave in to that late night plate of grits and sausage. I sat suddenly happy watching you, brother, and thinking of Jacques Cousteau, his endangered angel who will dive into the depths and with her gentle head buffet to the surface for that first vital breath, whatever she mistakes for her just born, rotted oars, broken keels and rudders, a drowning man, though the grateful saved never knew her, and what was saved in the end was not what she had meant to save at all. Somebody at dinner was asking about with poetry, if the process of the relationship between the poet and the editor was, this, well, we'd like this poem, but we'd like for you to do this, and I said, yeah, absolutely. Well, I remember this poem. Do you have favorite words? Well, one of my favorite words is the word flotsam. And I have tried to use the word flotsam in so many poems you would not believe it. Nobody will let me use the word flotsam. Well, I had it in this poem. I thought, this is perfect. It's got dolphins in it. I can get the word flotsam in this poem. So I got it in there. And in the draft, it was whatever she mistakes for her just born, rotted oars, random bits of flotsam. Oh, I was so happy. Gets accepted by the Southern Review. I'm going, yes! And then I get another letter from them saying, Cathy, we've been thinking, you can't use the word flotsam in this poem because flotsam floats. That's why they call it flotsam. I said, oh. Maybe I should read. I wasn't planning on reading this one, but since some of you commented on it, some of you read Hair, right? Those of you who were in the class. Do you want me to read Hair? That would be the right answer. Yeah? Can you imagine asking that and people going, maybe I'll read a couple of these. The last section of the book is actually about traveling with my students, or not necessarily with my students, but traveling abroad. And this is one of those poems that sort of turned on me and ended up being a poem that, very different from what I imagined. But, when you're traveling with students, you would think that their major concern would be maybe that the plane's going to crash, or that somebody's going to take the plane hostage or something like that. That's not their major concern. Their major concern is how they're going to blow dry their hair once they get there. I'm serious. So I decided that I would write this poem, and my intention was just to write a funny poem, sort of poking fun at the students. And it ended up not being such a funny poem after all. It's called Hair. Always when one travels with students, there is the problem of hair. More urgent than the Croats and Serbs, than the repatriated Haitian screaming, "I'd rather be dead," as he slipped the saving rope that tossed him around his throat, then flailing the waves like the Neanderthal breast of God, went madly under. Again and again, you explain in your most serious teacher voice the practicality of converters, rudiments of volt and charge, but they know all voltage is the same. Nudge each other and wink, the way relatives talk their secret talk in the bedrooms of the dying. So later, in the privacy of their rooms, they plug into this foreign world that to their surprise sputters and fizzes, then glows a brighter bright before the lights shut down, before the entire floor goes black as East Berlin, and the little concierge comes stamping, pounding the derelict hair above his balding head. You smile, reader. You smile, knowing as well as I the importance of being coiffed, of hair washed and blown just so for that long journey up the Zugspitze, or say the drive to Dachau, where we all want to look our best in case we see ourselves reflected in the oven's dull glaze, still heavy with the memory of flesh the villagers swore they never smelled, or if they did, thought it only their daughters dressing for their handsome evening soldiers, too dreamy how to pray. And all of these poems are about the struggle and ultimate death of my beautiful youngest brother, Paul, who died of AIDS about 2 years ago. He lived out in California in Sausalito with his partner, Bill. They lived in a wonderful house that looked out over the San Francisco harbor. And I flew out there in the April before he died, and I noticed that he had started growing orchids, and the house was just filled with orchids. And so I came back home with this image in my mind, and so I sat down and just started writing about these orchids. No wonder my brother, in that year of his life, began peopling his cliffside home with their strong and delicate tenacity, began foraging the genealogy of their loveliness as if they were kin, ancient aphrodisiacs, aristocrats of sepal and stem, star children of the Orient. It is this story he loves best, forgets twice he has told it, and tells again, how once in old New Guinea, a Belgian expedition and their native guide, startled upon a show of sweet dendrobium sprung from a mound of skulls, ribbony wreaths marking the forgotten unhinged door of Fontanelle, each bloom half bird, half spider, not quite furred breast and breath of bumblebee. On the last morning of my visit, he called me to the mirror by his front door, said, "Look," as he lifted his shirt and stared at his own reflection. I touched the flesh around each lesion as if to validate the freshly tilled soil of his body, then looked up, past him, past me, to the mirrored space behind us, to his quiet anthem of orchids whose seeds store no food, who can, if they must, survive on air. Learning how to pray. When I heard my brother was dying, youngest of the 6 of us, our lovely boy, I who in matters of the spirit had been always suspect, who even as a child snubbed Mama's mealtime ritual, began finally to pray, and fearing I would offend or miss completely the rightful target of my pleas, went knocking everywhere. The Buddha's huge and starry churning, Shiva, Vishnu, Isis, the worn and ragged god of Ishmael. I bowed to the druid reverence of trees, to water, fire, and wind, prayed to weather, to carbon, that soul linked to all things this and otherworldly, our carbon who art in heaven, prayed to rake and plow, the sweet acid stench of dung, to fly, to the fly-soiled wing, and to the soil. I could not stop myself. I, like a nymphomaniac, the dark promiscuity of my spirit, there for the taking, whore of my breaking heart, willing to lie down with anything. I read this one today to the class, and said that it was probably the best memory of my entire life. And this is the last one in this section about my brother. The last Christmas that he came home, I was living in a cabin. I was on sabbatical, living in a little one-room cabin, actually two-room cabin if you count the little kitchen. And I managed to get him out of the grips of my mother to come and spend the night with me in my cabin. And as I said, it was one big room, wood stove and my writing area, couch and everything, and then a table, and then my sleeping area, and then a little separate kitchen, and Christmas tree going and everything. And we stayed up a long time and had a wonderful time. And then I started taking out sheets and making up the couch. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'll take the couch tonight, and you can have my bed." And he said, "Oh no, how come we can't sleep together like we did when we were little?" And so we did. And this is the best memory of my life, sleeping with my brother. Like dreaming and knowing while you dream, you dream. This one night, despite propriety's ragged manifesto, this one night with your brother in this one bed. All night, your front to his back, breast to shoulder blades, belly pressed to the long, sweet slide of spine, to the right now still alive miracle of blood and bone. All night, you don't sleep. All night, beyond the lift and fall of your arm, curved around the curve of this one chest, you watch the lights of the Christmas tree, their soft pulsing like the chronic idling beneath your palm. All night, like the back rider of a downhill runaway sled, you do the only thing you can do. Close your eyes and hold on. Thank you very much.